The following podcast is a member of the Pokecasters Network. Pokecasters Network, supporting Pokemon content creators, their shows, and the community of Pokemon fans. To find out more, check out PokecastersNetwork.com or find us on Twitter and Facebook. Welcome to the PokePress Digest Podcast, a Pokemon news magazine show. Here you'll find some of the best content offered by our site. For more, visit us at pokepress.blogspot.com. In this second part of our Secrets of the Jungle discussion, we cover the score of the film and our thoughts on the movie itself. In the process, we revisit a song from a previous Pokemon movie and make some observations about scientists in the franchise's recent cinematic outings. There's definitely a pattern. Thanks. Well, still plenty more musical stuff to talk about before we give our overall opinion. As usual, there is a score that goes with this movie. It is more or less kept from the Japanese side. The Japanese side has some of the folks you would expect. Shinji Miyazaki, Rei Ishizuka, who's worked in the last couple movies, Kenta Higa Shioji, maybe I got that kind of close. He's worked on The Power of Us, and I guess Princess Connect, which is some other anime. One interesting name that they brought in was Shota Kageyama, which I think folks will know is someone who's worked off and on with the Pokemon video games and the main series. I think he may have started working around the time of Diamond and Pearl, but I'm not entirely sure on that one. But he also contributed some to the score as well. Now, just to sort of give my honest opinion here, I do not think the score to this movie is bad. And I think it might even be a tad bit better than some of the more recent ones. However, if there is some sort of magical thing to it that certain folks who really love Shinji Miyazaki's work really love, I, to be quite honest, do not hear it. I'm not saying he's a bad composer, more that the score that's been presented here is, at least to me, kind of the weakest musical aspect of it. The songs went very hard into an energetic and more jungly direction than the score did. So I'm not saying he's terrible, but, I might have considered rolling the dice and saying, if Ed Goldfarb had more time, I might say, let's see what he can come up with on the score portion of this. I don't know. Anne, what are your kind of thoughts?
Well, I think what I'm about to say is, gonna speak for itself. So, I put this movie on, and in my mind, I was like, I'm going to have to do a podcast on it. Let's pay real close attention to the score and take notes. And so in the beginning, I was like, okay, there are a couple moments where it's that's cool. The Song of the Zarude was yes. And then they kind of had that scene where he's leaving the troop and they're going to, see the elder and all that. And I was listening to it I don't know if I love this. It's okay. It's not hurting anything, but I don't know if I love it. And then, Always Safe started and I was back on board. And then shortly after, music was the furthest thing from my mind. And I think, again, that just kind of speaks for itself. Either the plot was that good that I didn't care about the score, or the score, there was nothing super special about the score to grab my attention. It wasn't until the very end, some of those tracks near the end, like Ambition and Truth and Protecting the Forest, A Vain Struggle, where I kind of started to get back into being oh yeah, music is a part of this movie, and started to pay attention to not just the songs, but the backing track. So I'm kind of with you in that, I don't feel the score was particularly special. I do think there were moments that were special and, not necessarily had I more time, but, I think over time, I will maybe be able to have a better way to break down, who of these guys did what. Because I often feel that there's a lot of old guard in Pokemon, and the things that have been the most the biggest changes in the past several years and the most interesting changes have come when they've kind of brought in a new director or a new writer or a new animator to the animation team. Like, those are the moments where, like, you start seeing a little bit of new life kind of breathe into the franchise. And I think music is a place where they kind of could benefit from starting to do that. And I hope that all these other credits besides Shinji Miyazaki on the score is a sign that, like, they're willing to take advantage of Shinji Miyazaki's experience and talent, but, like, are willing to maybe start trying some new things and getting some new people trained up and able to do this job and take the show in new directions. I hope.
Well, to mention something related to that, on the main anime, although they do use some of Shinji Miyazaki's compositions and stuff in there, sort of the main composer on the Japanese side for the TV show, I forget his name, but he came in within the last few years, I think with Journeys. And, I've listened to some of his stuff. I think it is a bit, I do enjoy it, I think, a bit better, but it would be unfair if we didn't at least consider other possibilities here as to why the scores, at least, Anne and I are largely in agreement. If you think they're still going great, that's, you're entitled to your opinion. Yeah. I absolutely.
And you're winning.
Like, more or less.
You're getting what you want out of life.
But I think Anne and I are kind of in agreement that we would like to see something more aggressive, more ambitious out of that. And part of me wonders, maybe it's not just the composition. It could also be the orchestra. Now, I don't think that the orchestras that they use to make these scores are untalented. That is not what I think the actual issue is, or that they don't care about the material. I think it may actually be the opposite. I think they might be the weight of the Pokemon franchise and its reputation worldwide as, the highest grossing media franchise in human history may actually be producing music that is a little too safe in terms of scoring elements and a performance that is a little too safe. And it might, one thing they could try that I've suggested is that when a movie is based in a certain part of the world or a certain city or a certain country or whatever, is, obviously this would have been very difficult with Secrets of the Jungle with the pandemic and whatnot, but maybe in the future they can contact like a symphony orchestra in that city or in that country or something like that and have them, get them into a studio and have them perform the score for the movie, which I think would be a really cool way, and it would give sort of a fresh set of folks a chance to work with the material and stuff. And I think you'd get something that would maybe make the movie actually give it a better sense of place, which has kind of been my problem with the last, I don't know, I sort of draw the line after movie 10, after the Dark Ride movie, that things sort of go on a more and more vanilla direction, with a few exceptions, like obviously the Hoopa movie. And I think shaking things up there, they might need to try a few different things, I think would be a good idea. Because we know we've gotten some really neat stuff in the past, like with the Dark Ride movie, like with the Latias and Latios movie is an absolutely fantastic score. Even the non-accordion stuff in there is really, really good. But those were some of my thoughts. And bless you. I did have you try and do some research to get sort of a Japanese opinion on some of these things. You did do. Yeah. You unfortunately weren't able to track down like any Japanese newspaper reviews of the last couple Pokemon movies or blogs or stuff, but you did try to find some reviews on like Amazon JP and stuff like that. What did you find?
Yeah. As you said, the news outlet that I found was mostly basically just this thing is releasing and this date and this is maybe a person of note who worked on it. But I did, the Voices of the People, I found a couple. There's one for The Birth of Mewtwo that I thought was interesting because I feel like this person would get along with you, Stephen. He or she, they had a lot to say about the mixing and the mastering of that, the track. Let's see, that kind of went over my head a little bit. But there's a track, The Birth of Mewtwo, It's like the same song in both movies. The sound quality has become much better in time compared to those recorded originally because of advanced current technology. Mastering here is almost no complaint. However, Birth of Mewtwo was a dissatisfaction from the original recording. Translation is something like rocket group oral background and arrangement in Satoshi battle determination. Like, I'm so sorry, everybody. But he feels like he thought originally that, like, I guess the original movie, like, it was a mistake of the technology to record. But, like, this time it's digitally remastered from the master tape, which means that the problem was probably with the person who created the track or something. So, like, he had a lot to say. So there are definitely a lot of people in Japan, it seems, who have opinions, just like we do, about music mastering and, like, very minutia. But more to the point of, like, how the music actually made you feel. There's an Amazon review for, The Power of Us, of a person who says that they kind of bought a soundtrack every summer. Like, they watched the movie in the summer and then bought the soundtrack, or vice versa. And then the year of Power of Us, listened to it several times, but compared to last year's soundtrack, they kind of have the impression that there's a lot of gentle songs that feel very well-rounded overall, which isn't really a compliment to them. Like, they feel like that's nice, but there's no killer tune. And one of the examples they bring up is, like, the theme of the Erasion. But they do say that the sound quality of the orchestra is very beautiful and that the songs often have, like, a healing feeling to them. So they like the soundtrack, but think some of the previous work is better. But for contrast, from Billy Billy, there's a review that says Shinji Miyazaki is indeed the master of soundtracks of Pokemon series and a role model for this person. So a bit of a spectrum of people. Again, a lot of very different opinions, just like ours.
I suppose so. I mean, we talked a lot about the score in the last couple movies, especially since, like, during the XY and in I Choose You, they did replace most, if not all, of the Japanese score. That's kind of what I came up when I was referring to, kind of the roll of the dice and see what Ed could come up with. That's kind of sort of what I was referring to. They still do replace a lot of the score elements in the TV show. And, while you are, as a listener, entitled to prefer, mix and match, whatever, I get the feeling that it's like either a nothing to a lot of folks, or maybe in some cases it pales in comparison to their, I don't know. Like, some of this is going back to Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution, since there you have several points of comparison. You're comparing it both to here in the West, you're comparing it both to the 98 Japanese version score, which does have some significant differences, and also to the 99 dub score. And I did see folks in the reviews I read in English of that who sort of said, yeah, this new score, it's not as good as either of those. And there were a handful of folks who did like the new score, and I got the feeling it wasn't just because they had kept it from the Japanese version. This is admittedly kind of a tough nut to crack with all of that. And to be honest, the opinion on Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution is largely meh overall, not just in the music department. That missed folks' expectations in a number of areas, sometimes to the point where it made them angry, sometimes not. Sometimes to the point where they just said, I'm just going to watch the one I grew up with, or even the original Japanese version. So I don't think there's the current score paradigm definitely has its fans. I get the feeling, just from talking to folks, I haven't had a chance to talk to too many folks in person about Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution because, of course, of the pandemic. But from discussions I've had beforehand and stuff, I don't think I love the Japanese score just the way it is really, like, there's a decent number of people in it. I don't feel it's a huge percentage of the overall market. We do have a fair bit of a disadvantage there. Remember, this is a show that's aimed at kids, many of whom are too young to get on the internet.
Or even verbalize their feelings.
So you're not going to see them on Facebook or Twitter, at least officially. So I don't know. Like I said, I think that the score here in Secrets of the Jungle, they need to start taking some more risks, because the vocal songs went very much in a wholehearted, or like a full-throated into, like, even on the Japanese side, there's some stuff that really went into the jungle theming much more and went much more emotional than the score did. And the score doesn't have to follow that 100%. And it wasn't such a difference that it was, ruin the movie or anything, but it was enough of a difference that you noticed it. That I noticed it. I think Anne noticed it. I think a lot of folks noticed it. And I get the feeling when people are complimenting the music on this movie, I've seen very few bad things about the music in this movie compared to, like I said, Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution got some compliments, a lot of and a fair amount of This one has mostly been either not mentioned at all or mentioned positively. I still get the feeling they're talking more about the vocal songs than they are about the score. Mm. And I feel like in a franchise where we have, you look at the games and the main games, the side games, and it seems like they're doing such interesting work, such thematic. Not everything is radio worthy, as I would call it. But you listen to stuff like in Sword and Shield, like in Pokemon Masters, those are some of the best ones. Mystery Dungeon, even stuff, maybe not so much Pokemon Go, that has somewhat different music demands as a game you might be playing while crossing the street. But I feel like the scores to the anime should be maybe, the demands of scoring a TV show or a movie are a little bit different than a video game. But I feel there should be more correlation. They should be more in line tonally than they are, and stylistically than they are. And does that make sense?
It makes sense. I don't know if I agree as strongly in some areas, but it definitely all makes sense, and definitely I agree in the sense that I would like to see them try some new things. What those new things are is, up to them. And I can only hope that, in the sense that I've been talking for many years about, I'd like to see some new things done with plot and direction overall in the movie. And the past couple years with this alternate timeline, we've gotten some really good Pokemon plots in our movies that, for a while there we were struggling with. And general direction of the Pokemon movie was in a strange place, but they've really gotten some great movies in the past couple years. So I can only hope that that's kind of a trend that is continuing through the company, and that the music scoring will hopefully start following that suit. Yeah.
Yeah. So like I said, I don't want to completely dunk on Shinji Miyazaki and his crew, because first of all, I know that they've done things in prior movies that I've enjoyed a lot more than what we get here more recently. But I think, just like with the sort of the plot and stuff that made them do this alternate universe, the movies were in a space that I think is a textbook example of you become so risk averse that not taking a risk becomes the risk. That if you don't take a risk, you're just going to keep getting, some fraction of what you got before. And and eventually that's not going to be enough. And basically they decided, after Volcanion and the Mechanical Marvel, or maybe even before that they decided, okay, we need to shake some things up here. And they did that with the plot. I think the score needs some sort of shake-up. Whether that's bringing in all new people, that might be a little bit drastic, but just picking a new direction and a new philosophy. And, like I said, maybe doing some of those things. Because, suppose, we talked about The Power of Us. That's set in San Francisco. San Francisco is a city with immense musical history. Everything from, Creedence Clearwater Revival to Metallica to, all sorts of things. The hippie movement of the 1960s that you could pull from to create, different motifs or different characters and stuff like that. And I think that would be really interesting. Same thing, Genesect movie, set in New York City, one of the most culturally diverse cities in the world. Similar things for some of the movies that are set in Europe. Every European country has its own musical history and instruments, and maybe they bring in a little bit of that. There might be a little Greco-Roman stuff in Arceus and the Jewel of Life. And Arceus' theme is kind of nice there. But I feel I want them to go harder, like the main games do. Maybe not quite as much. It doesn't have to be like there is one track in The Power of Us right near the beginning during the opening credit sequence that really goes out there. It doesn't need to be quite that much necessarily, but I think it would integrate better with the franchise as a whole if they push things a little bit harder.
You said it well.
Yeah. So I mean, if you like Shinichi Miyazaki, what he's currently putting out. You're certainly entitled to your opinion, but I think there would be a benefit to doing something more aggressive. And I think in this particular movie, Secrets of the Jungle, the vocal songs absolutely on the Japanese and Western sides went there. Not always with the raw jungle elements, in some cases very much so. And I'm not going to claim that They added all this stuff in as soon as the test audience survey data from Netflix from Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution came in. Oh boy, are we in trouble if we... Now, I don't know that that's really what happened or the sequence of events there. It might have prodded them along a little bit to make some changes in there. But score-wise, I think we need to see more in the future. I don't think that the movies are in any danger of falling off the face of the earth or anything like that. But I see it as another opportunity to improve another aspect of them.
I like what you said there, another opportunity, because, I think both of us would agree, regardless of what happens with the score, we are going to see these movies, and we are going to have a great time, and we are going to enjoy them. And that's, so again, if you love these things the way they are, that's great. There's nothing wrong with it, but there's an opportunity, I think, for it to be more. And I think none of us would be hurt to see them try more and different and new and continue to improve.
We'll see where things go from here. Like I said, I'm not angry. I just feel like these could be musically more than what they are. All right. Well, with that being said, let's go sort of our overall opinions about the music here. I have a few additional thoughts of some interesting ideas and other stuff like that. So I do think the insert songs really do add a lot to it. And to be honest, we did kind of bag on the score, but having the insert songs, I think, takes some weight off of there. That's probably one of the things that really didn't benefit the score in Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution, is that because those English songs weren't there, that for a lot of folks that made them concentrate more on the score that was and put even more of a burden on it. But so I do think, the insert songs, they might have taken some pressure off of the score in terms of the musical reputation of the movie, but I think they were generally a good addition, although both sets of vocal songs, whichever version you're watching, I feel like they didn't mess so badly that they seemed completely out of place or took you out of the movie for the most part, but they didn't meld super well, like maybe the elements in the fifth movie where you have vocal songs, you have several different instrumental styles for different parts of the movie, and despite being distinct, they kind of work together more. I don't know, Anne, is that kind of the overall vibe you got from this?
I would definitely say the vocal tracks helped the score in a lot of ways. One way, just taking some of the weight off of the score, because I think thinking back, a lot of people, myself included, would think, oh, I loved the score of Coco, because in our minds, the vocal tracks are part of that. I would hope that they brought some extra influences and different ideas to the composers. I would also agree that the score that didn't involve the vocals was, for me, very forgettable, although I had a lot of moments, as I said, where I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Oh, that kind of brings me back in. So again, it kind of, in some ways, improvements are being made. In some ways, I think there are other opportunities they could take part of. But overall, I liked the music in this movie. Whether some parts of the score were more weak-linked than others, yeah, that's up for debate. But overall, I really liked the music in this movie, and I think I'll take away fond memories of it. And in that, it's a net positive for me.
Yeah, it definitely is. And like I said, going back to score there, it felt like there were parts where it's almost like there was something underneath a frozen pond that was about ready to break out there, but didn't quite make it. So it's not I don't think it's hopeless or anything like that. I think there is a possibility of, if you do have to kind of choose a different direction and somewhat different philosophy and stuff like that. So I did want to throw in one other thing there. Another song that's not in this movie. Not that I would really expect it to be, but I think would work really well. It's a Pokemon song. I wanted to go all the way back to the soundtrack to Pokemon 2000. And, we kind of covered this song last year when I interviewed the engineer that mixed it. But I wanted to sort of float out there. And do you think the song They Don't Understand, maybe with some readaptation and, obviously a new arrangement and stuff, could somehow have been used in conjunction with this movie?
Yes. I can think of 15 different reasons. There's a lot in that song that could apply to Coco versus his family, Dada Zaruto versus the elders and the rest of them, Ash versus humanity. There's even Zed and the other scientists and the good scientists versus him. Yes, there's a lot of places where that, and the idea of a generational gap. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just in case you're not aware, They Don't Understand is part of a subgenre of pretty much Western Pokemon songs. I know of no Japanese equivalents to this that are the adults don't get Pokemon subgenre, along with blah, blah, blah from the second movie soundtrack. It started off, I believe, as something, as a romantic boyfriend-girlfriend type of song. And that's where the, only we know what it means and all that stuff comes from. And I guess the guy's son, Steve Diamond's son, Cole, gave them the idea of reworking it into a Pokemon song, and so it was. And then that song was in turn performed by Dream Street. It's on the second movie soundtrack. It's got lines like, we got our own special language that only we can speak, and only we know what it means, and, and understand Pokemon. It's something I only realized sometime after the first time when I watched the movie, maybe during the second time, I'm not sure exactly. So I can't guarantee that if I had for some crazy reason been hired as a consultant, I would have thought of this during production. But I think that actually, in hindsight, if they were going to bring back an older Pokemon song, that might have been the one. And I kind of wanted to sort of leave on that as sort of a thought to ponder. It would have to be reworked a fair bit, and some lyrics would probably have to be changed, but boy, I think they could have made something of that. So not faulting them terribly for not doing it. It may not even have been possible. Obviously one of the members of Dream Street passed away from COVID last year, so that bringing the band back together might not even have been an option if they reused the song, but kind of wanted to toss that out there. And any other thoughts or things or ideas you wanted to toss out there, things they could have tried but didn't, or...
I can't think of anything else they could have tried but didn't. I like the potential and They Don't Understand. I'm intrigued by the idea of a world where they hire you and me on as consultants to a Pokemon movie and what monstrosity we would create. But...
I would seriously consider such an offer. I do not expect one.
You're right.
But...
you know our emails.
Flying Without Wings is a well-written song, but its inclusion on the Pokemon 2000 soundtrack is a bit odd. There is plenty of flying in the movie, but most of it clearly involves wings. If you're willing to ignore that disparity, however, there are a number of lines that do match up well. We see several friendships, familiar and new, featured in the film. You can argue that characters like Professor Oak and Slowking lead reasonably solitary lives. For that matter, you could even say the same thing about Shmoody Island itself, being fairly isolated from the rest of the world. If you're looking for the most Pokemon of the lyrics, though, those are probably in the bridge, as striving towards the seemingly impossible is a running theme of the franchise. Even after that, however, there is one more parallel to be drawn. Delia winds up coming face to face with Ash in a somewhat unexpected time and place, at least for him. While this final part of the song may have been originally intended as being between two lovers, I find that it still works for the mother-son reunion. Anyway, the next time someone tells you this song doesn't match up with the movie, I hope you have some different ideas to give them. Thanks. Hi folks, just a quick heads up. While this is a Pokemon movie, we do discuss some of the film's darker scenes, so consider yourself warned. Okay, well, as much time as we spent talking about the music, there's still a movie here. I think sort of the big thing we should focus on here is the, Dada Zarude Zarude, I keep wanting to say it at 3 syllables. It is only 2. And Coco relationship, which is, the heart, almost literally, of the film. And it's a pretty good relationship. I mean, Ash is kind of almost relegated. He's a point of view character in this one, which he kind of is in a lot of the movies. But especially in this one, the story is not so much about him. And I felt like the two characters, Dada Zarude and Coco, got along and had a very interesting, back and forth and stuff like that. Anne, how'd you feel about, that was really the crux of the movie. How did you feel about it?
I have a lot of feelings. I have so many feelings. This was a really interesting movie, and I really loved that they kind of brought up that Papa Zarude didn't really have a good father role model growing up, and so a lot of his I guess I just don't know how to be a dad, and I don't know what I'm doing. That kind of spoke to me a bit, because my father also kind of grew up in a family where they did not have a father figure. And my mom once told me, when they got married and he was and they started having kids, that one of the things that they talked about, he was I don't know how to be a dad. I don't know how to parent these kids because I didn't have a functioning family. I didn't have a dad around. My mom was just doing her best. That kind of always struck me as interesting, because growing up I was like, oh gosh, my daddy's the best and he tucks me in. I love him. He's perfect. And yeah, he did a really great job with us. So there's a kind of, I like that sense of Papa Zarude is kind of doubting himself a lot and not sure what he's doing right, if he's doing anything right. And from Coco's point of view, Coco's you are the best dad. I love you. You are giving me all the emotional things I need, even though we're having a little bit of conflict. We are still a very tightly knit family unit. So that's something that spoke to me and I thought was very special.
Yeah, I don't want to go fully into it. The relationship with my dad is complicated for a variety of reasons. I'll just say, my parents are divorced and have been for a long time. I'm honestly much closer with my mother, which, this movie is not, bad for mothers and their children either. And I think, this is sort of a type of story that, yes, they could have done earlier in the franchise, but has a different ring now that the franchise has been around long enough that some of the original fans have kids, are getting to that point. Some of them are even old enough to see this movie. And I think that's one reason for, like I said, why we're seeing this movie now, even though they certainly could have made it 10, 20 years ago. And there certainly were family-based aspects, particularly to the second and third movies. Definitely had that kind of dynamic going on there. But I think that we certainly got something of a different movie because it is being made now, and that relationship between those two characters, which is mirrored many times, either as a friendly relationship like between Coco and Ash, or between Ash and his mom. Dada Zarude, he mentions, I never really knew my father. Presumably something happened to him when he was very young or something like that. That's big there. The next thing I want to kind of talk about is the use of language in the film. Now, I don't mean there's no this is still a Pokemon movie. There's no dirty words or anything. What I actually mean is, initially in the movie, we hear Coco and Zarude and the other Zarude talking to each other, in whatever language you're watching the movie in. It's not really until Ash has an encounter directly with them and they sort of bring them in there that we sort of, they weren't really speaking human talk there. They were talking to the other Pokemon and stuff like that. And they, Coco is, as the film goes on, sort of becomes bilingual and stuff like that. One of the reviews I read, the reviews were maybe not as positive as the fan base, which is kind of to be expected, although there weren't too many of them that were really really down on the movie. They seemed to at least think it was okay. But one of them said they pulled a Hunt for Red October, which I find is a very interesting comparison. Where in that thing, you hear some folks speaking Russian, and then there's sort of a weird little focus trick, and then they're speaking English. This is kind of a bit like that. What did you think of that?
I loved it. So anyone who has listened to my podcast knows the language barrier between human and Pokemon is my jam. Languages in general are my jam. Like, I will be publishing a book hopefully this next year where, like, objectively there might be a plot in there, but it's really about the language barrier. Like, this is my thing. I love how they did it, how they didn't treat, like, they just treated it like when Coco and his Dada are talking together, they talk, quote, normal. When he's talking with Ash, he's talking how Ash would talk and perceive it. It's very fascinating. I love that there are moments where you can tell that just because they said it in human language doesn't mean Coco didn't understand. Yes, no, I love a lot of things about the language and the use of language and the way people's words changed and the way the humans had prejudice towards the Pokemon during the fireworks thing, that whole debacle, because they couldn't speak the same language. And it wasn't until somebody explained the situation that they realized, oh, I guess I was a little harsh. And that is something that I bet kids and adults can relate to in the world we go in now, where when we don't understand a situation, we can be very judgmental, and often the problem is just we don't speak the same language.
I like to say that most of the world's problems are caused by either inadequate or a lack or a problem with communication. Really, that's quite true, especially like in the social media age, where, you know, things are everything's a soundbite, it seems, sometimes. That's why one reason I like doing these long-form discussions, even though it's way more detailed than most people will ever care about these movies. I think we come a lot closer to a more complete picture of these things than you get from, you know, a tweet or a post or whatever. All right, well, let's talk about some of the plot elements in here. There's one scene that is frequently mentioned as, if there's that scene in this movie, it is it's like a dash cam recording on Zed's like SUV or whatever. They have a couple of those at the company, and it's from like 10 years ago. And it shows Zed basically, I mean, this movie, one of the criticisms of it is it's a bit derivative of stuff like Tarzan, Planet of the Apes, and other stuff. There's only so many fish out of water stories out there.
It's derivative of other Pokemon movies sometimes.
But I guess you could consider, you know, maybe this part is derivative of Detective Pikachu, but I probably have to make too much fun of it because, you know, Zed runs the couple and their child off the road. Their car catches fire, and eventually, you know, they manage to push the kid away, and that's Coco. But Zed just sort of walks away and leaves the other folks, the mom and dad, to die. In, you know, when the gas tank explodes or whatever on the vehicle. One of the darkest things we've seen in a Pokemon movie. I do wonder, there's a decent chance this movie would have gotten a PG rating had it been released to theaters in the U.S., you know, just kind of based on that scene. What did you think of that?
Of that specifically, it's hard to say. Like, there's a lot in this movie that, as you say, is maybe derivative of Tarzan. But again, derivative of other Pokemon movies. We've seen scientists looking for the healing spring to save humanity, and there's a scientist on board who does not care about the nature and the Pokemon. Like, we've seen a lot of these tropes. What I liked about this movie is that it presented all these things in a way that felt fresh and new and made me care. I found the Zed's, like, that whole thing where he's talking into the camera and his devolve into insanity. I found that very interesting.
You know, he's obviously got some sort of mental illness, which I don't want to make too much fun of. It doesn't excuse his actions, of course.
No, but like he clearly could benefit from someone giving him a hand.
Yeah.
Redirecting his thoughts. But I appreciated that because it felt like, again, just a fresh take on it. Like, it's not like I want power, I want to be the best, although he kind of does. It's, I want everyone to see that I'm right. Like, he's kind of lost sight of his goal of helping humanity in his desire to prove that he's right. And that's new.
Yeah. Well, he also believes that, well, if we do what I want to do, then we can, you know, that's kind of how he justifies what he does to the couple and, you know, even potentially their child. You know, he could have easily killed all three of them.
Yeah.
And, sorry, it just, you know, I was just thinking, what an awful, I mean, this is one of the, even with all the team leads that we've seen in here, but this is see, the person I thought of with this was almost like Elizabeth Holmes from Theranos, you know? Now, she didn't obviously run people off the road who tried to, you know, go to like the SEC or to the New York Times or whatever it was. She never did anything like that. But, you know, back with her stuff, you know, she had medical stuff that didn't do what it said it did. And like she was so convinced she could change the world that she's willing to put other people in danger. And now it's very different kind of here where the guy is taking a very active role in offing his boss and his wife and possibly their kid, you know. Because that's what he's doing. He's trying to get the data that that his boss has said, you know, we're not going to exploit this. I'm in charge here, you know, whatever. It's not right to do this. And they try and, you know, obviously, I guess, you know, 10 years ago, maybe it was easier to hide every trace of that or whatever. It's a dark scene, and it surprised a lot of folks that it went there.
But as dark as it is, I think that's something that in this day and age, like we encounter those scenarios, maybe not on such a grand scale, but at a very young age, we are kind of faced with these kind of hard decisions, and people who don't always want to, you know, as the Coco's dad said, you know, wait and put the brakes on it and try to find a better solution and talk about it. Or the female scientist who, you know, was going along with the plan and then was like, you know what, we have gone too far. I'm sorry, Zerudo. I'm very sorry. How can we make this right? So I think like that presents a lot of conflicts that children repeatedly encounter in a very fantastical and grandiose and scary way. But I think those are all things that, you know, as much as people were shocked it went that dark, I think your kids can relate to it more than you think they can.
Some of them definitely. So speaking of a little bit dark stuff, towards the end of the movie, there's a final confrontation between Coco and Zed, where it's not exactly clear to me what's exactly happening. This is after Coco somehow uses that voice of the forest or whatever it is to heal Dada Zarud, and then Zed, he's been thrust out of the mech he was in that Pikachu disabled, and he's like, he can't believe that the other guy is still alive, and it's like it's hard to tell exactly what's happening. At one point it seems like Coco is so angry that some of the characters seem to think that Coco is going to try to kill Zed. And at the same time, I've heard other folks say, well, like, is he like about to commit suicide and jump off this is really, I mean, for a kid's, you know, for a Pokemon movie. I mean, even like you compare to the stuff in like Mewtwo Strikes Back or Latios passing away, this is still kind of describing this stuff in language, in you know, in words is honestly a little bit difficult. But what did you think of that scene?
Overall, I liked it. Again, I am a grown adult without children, so that might not necessarily be the, you know, defining opinion on this. I agree with you that it's very difficult to put into words, and it's something that I kind of want to analyze more before I be like, okay, this is what's going on in the scene, and this is what it means. It's entirely possible that it means different things to different people. People who maybe have not felt the kind of justified rage that Coco would have been feeling in that scene might read it differently. People who have not felt the things that Zed was going through might read it differently than those of us who maybe have. And that's fine, I think. Again, as a grown adult who sees a therapist weekly to like sort through complex feelings, I liked it. I thought it presented a lot of really interesting emotions, and that Coco came out of it with a choice that nullified the conflict. That I was very afraid that it was going to be one of those scenarios where the villain, like, you know, denies everything to their dying breath and then dies, and that takes care of everything. I was very happy that Coco found a solution where the bad guy lives, And whether or not he faces justice, apparently he goes to jail, but what his sentence is, etc., that all happens off screen, and we don't care about it. And Coco made a decision that was right for him morally. Like, again, I'm happy with it. I think it needs some more watchings for me to have more articulate thoughts than that.
Yeah, I've watched the movie twice, and I'm still not sure I completely understand the scene. Because, like, not long before that, Ash says, we're not going to let you get rid of Coco's parents twice. And, I have to wonder if I were in Ash's shoes and saw what happened there. It's like, shoot, did I just intentionally give Coco permission to kill Zed,
Yeah.
So, yeah, at the end of the movie, you do see him. I mean, first off, someone, Team Rocket finds, this is a bit of an awkward tradition. They finally break into his office, and like I said, he hasn't deleted this recording. I don't know if he could never bring himself to do it or to look at it again or what that is. But, they keep that. Now, I would have thought that if Team Rocket, if they let, like, the headquarters organization know, hey, we got into that guy's office, turns out that he murdered some of his coworkers. You think that the Team Rocket higher-ups would be like, oh, hey, let's keep that and use that as blackmail or something like that on him. But I guess they're so disgusted by it that, without comment, they sort of turn it over to the authorities without, attaching their names to it. Like they put it on they put it on a flash drive or a memory card or something and slip it underneath the police station or for Officer Jenny to find. And at the end of the movie, we see he's also basically confessed it to half a dozen people in an earlier scene. So there's, it's certainly enough to probably get a warrant, with that many of his coworkers as eyewitnesses who will, So... Yeah, that's an interesting dynamic in this film, and I'm still not entirely sure what I think about it. But a bit of a turn, and I guess on a bit of a lighter note, the last couple movies, if you want to call this lighter, have been pretty tough on scientists. You look at Detective Pikachu, Anne Laurent gets presumably killed by. We don't see the glass go into her, obviously, because the hologram cuts off right as it's about to do that. And then Fuji, since we got the Mewtwo Strikes Back remake, him and his crew all get, incinerated or blown to smithereens or whatever by Mewtwo. It's interesting that Zed is the one who, despite all the horrible things he's done, it's kind of interesting because they talk about, like, the law of the Zaru during the thing there, and in the end, the bad guy is taken away by the law. I found that an interesting parallel in that part of the story. I guess that wasn't really that much lighter, but it's something we had to certainly address here,
Hopefully we'll get some more scientists who do good in the world and good things happen to them and are good role models to us all.
Maybe there's hope then for that remake of Power of One at some point. I mean, granted, Oak and Ivy don't really achieve a ton in that movie, but at least they don't make anything worse. Yeah. And,
they are playing their own special part in the solution of that movie, so
I guess. Oh, well, in any case, going on to some other characters, although this movie is really about a father-son relationship, we kind of mentioned this. I don't know if we've said it in this discussion. I think we said it in our pre-discussion that the opening and ending themes, the opening credits and closing credits themes in both versions, Japanese and Western, are performed by women. This could have been, a very male-centric movie with virtually no female characters. I mean, obviously, yes, we just mentioned Officer Jenny at the end. I think we must see Nurse Joy because there's some scenes at the Pokemon Center. There are a couple of female scientists. The one, of course, the Coco's mom, who perishes, and then one or two of the other scientists in the current group is female as well. And like I said, I think I mentioned Ash's mom. If I didn't, she was in there as well. So, because I think, especially in this day and age, the relationship between the two of them is, well, there is a paternal, aspect to it. It still can be appreciated by it. But I did find it interesting that there is actually a lot of female, not certainly as much as Power of Us, where we have Risa in there as sort of the co-protagonist of that movie. One of the major things in there.
Oh, sorry. I'd like to take a moment to point out, not every story has to have a ton of female characters. Like, it's not necessarily unfeminist just because women aren't present. What is I think the problem that a lot of women have, rather than just, oh, there's no women, is more that the women, when they're there, how are they treated? If this is a story about a father-son, that's not necessarily a bad thing, that it's all about the dudes. What I love about this movie is that it's a movie about a father-son, but they also make some parallels to mother-son relationships.
Yes.
Every woman in this movie, like, is a very interesting character, even if they have but a small role to play. And that's great. And so, like, I don't want, like, anyone to think, like, as we bring that up, that, like, oh, there's no women in this movie, like, it's not feminist. It's like, it's a movie about a boy and his dad. So, sorry. Off my box.
Yeah, I may have played things a little too woke there. This going back to our
No. It's good to be woke. I just want to make sure, like, people don't get, like, the wrong assumption from what we're saying.
We kind of had. I'll admit, I did kind of one reason I included Anne here is I didn't want for this discussion series. I didn't want everyone to be a white male. That said, Anne, I want to make it clear I do not expect you to speak for all women. If I get another person who is, African American or Hispanic or whatever, I don't expect them to speak for all of that race. But I do want to include folks who have different life experiences. And, I will not be perfect.
None of us are.
But I did want to point that out with this movie, is that I do want to say that if this movie was made 20 years ago, earlier in the franchise, they might have been much more, we might not have had that.
I think you're right, yeah.
Like I said, this is one that's for, I think families of all kinds is something here. I mean, that's kind of the point of the story, is that you have a Zarude, a Pokemon, and a human that has chosen to basically adopt. And I think that's an important point to bring up here. So I guess with this point, we just got to go in. I've been talking for over 2 hours. It'll edit down a little bit shorter. These are never fun to edit, but it is usually worth it in the end. What do you overall think of this movie, like ranking-wise, experience-wise? I mean, obviously, I think both of us would have loved to have seen this in an actual movie theater, but circumstances simply did not permit it. Japan is kind of lucky if they got anything out of that. I don't know how much video streaming is a thing there. Like, I know that during the pandemic, they've done, with some of the movies, they've done like premium streaming offerings where you spend an extra fee to get, like, they've done that for like Trolls World Tour, Scoob, a couple other ones, Mulan, and stuff like that. Possibly in part based on the reception of Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution in terms of viewership. But that was a bit of a ramble there. But where does this actually rank in there? Do you think, like, is this? I think both of us really like this movie. But like overall, I think maybe of the reboot trilogy, I think Power of Us might be the one I appreciate the most. I mean, I don't have kids, so I hope that someday when I do, that my years of running a Pokemon League will at least have prepared me at least slightly for it. So maybe I can't relate to this as much as I would like, but I do think it's pretty well made, and it's certainly worth discussing. I think we'll be coming back to this in some forms, referencing it and things like that. So definitely one of the better movies, and as far as I'm concerned, the reboot trilogy, they're all at least good. Certainly better in my mind than the X and Y generation, and generally speaking, the black and white generation before it, where I think is where they started to notice that things were getting a little too dull. But Anne, you're entitled to your opinion, so go ahead.
Oh, well, luckily I'm not going to go off the rails here. Like, I also really liked this movie. Yeah, I think definitely of the alternate timeline, this is my favorite. It's kind of hard for me to rank it together with the anime timeline, just because to me, I very much see that Ash and alternate timeline Ash as two very different characters. But, oh gosh, this movie is so good. This movie did so much that surprised me. It did so much that I appreciate. And it did, like, the one thing that I always love is, like, they treated the Pokemon not like they were animals, but like they are a different culture. one that humans don't always understand, but one that lives side by side with humans. Oh gosh, it made me so happy. There's so much to love about this movie, and I'm very happy with it. I'm so glad we got to watch it. I'm so glad it finally released.
Yeah, I will not begrudge you for liking, saying this is the best of the three. I think that's a valid choice. It's not maybe my pick of the three alternate universe ones, but I think it's definitely a solid entry and does some things very, very well.
And the voice cast on fire, Sarah Natacheni is she's really coming in to her own as Ash. I'm loving it. I'm here for it.
Yeah, and actually, we should point out there's some neat little returns here. Like one of the voice actors, Megan Hollingshead, who played Nurse Joy and Officer Jenny during the first. She left before the dub switch over, like a season or two before that. But she has a role. If you listen really carefully to one of the female characters she plays, you can hear, that's a little bit of original Nurse Joy in there. But, I think they put together a good product despite some of the areas where I think they could still improve. So I definitely like this one. Some parts, I'm not sure how often I'm going to rewatch it, just because in part of some of the dark elements that I'm still kind of grappling with, to be honest.
Yeah.
But it's definitely another solid effort. So, well, with that out of the way, what's our next discussion? Well, we will get to deconstructing Pokemon music at some point, but, this has been a busy month or so for Pokemon music, really a busy year. And so we want to cover as much as we can. And so our next thing that we want to cover is the music of Pokemon 25, the album.
Woo!
So yes, this came out also earlier this month, and I picked it up digitally. I picked it up on CD. I plan on picking up the vinyl when that releases in February next year for, I guess, Pokemon Day, because I need to own it 3 times. Come on. But I think what's going to happen there is it's not officially related to the Secrets of the Jungle movie, but they released a week apart. And I think there are, at least in some of the songs and some of the music videos, some definite similarities to the movie. And we're going to sort of treat it as an extension of this discussion. But that is sort of our next one. We'll probably each pick out a couple songs from there to focus on. But until then, Anne, thank you very much for being on.
Thank you for having me.
This has been Stephen Reich. All right, folks, thanks. Thanks for listening to the PokePress Digest podcast. We'd appreciate if you rate or review us on your podcast app of choice. If you'd like to find more of our great content, visit our website at pokepress.blogspot.com. If you'd like to contact us, send an email to pokepress@gmail.com or follow @pokepress on Twitter.